Um, but one significant difference between those days and today is a lot of the systems that were really sort of core proprietary technology for Looking Glass, our rendering system, our physics system, and such that we pushed forward in those days, are very much off the shelf technology these days, which leaves us a lot of freedom to build on top of the kind of stuff that we did in those days, and explore some new areas. So we've been exploring specifically some expansions on the factions in Underworld Ascendant, something that we really only kind of scratched the surface of in the original Ultima Underworlds. So that we're looking to expand into a more fully fledged diplomacy model and AI. We're looking at some ecological modeling that will tie into the faction system, so that there'll be policy objectives for the state of the world that the dwarves or the elves or shamblers are going to want to achieve, and they'll have some opinions about what you do in the course of gameplay, that will be more fully simulated. Um, so in that sense, there's a lot of opportunities now because of things that we don't have to focus a lot of development effort on, to explore some new areas just technologically. Let's
Yeah,
see.
and these were all things that kind of you actually had concepts surrounding that when you were working on Underworld Ascended, but due to time, money, and technology were things you just couldn't fully explore.
Uh, sure. I mean, again, the constraints we were under pretty severe constraints in terms of budget, team size, and such. But those can work for you. And it forced us to prioritize for System Shock 2, for instance, kind of what we could model and what we couldn't model. Um, One of the things that you mentioned earlier, which we have, there's no one alive in System Shock. Everyone's been killed off. So you arrive as the hacker, and everyone's dead before you arrive. Um, and we did that not just so that we did that in part because we didn't want to have to tackle a dialogue system, interactive dialogue system the way we had in Underworld. Not just simply so we could save the effort of doing that, but also because we weren't really satisfied with how dialogues worked in the Underworld. It felt stilted to us. And so we were looking for another way to express narrative that wasn't a character, picking from 3 chat lines, and going down dialogue trees. And that was actually the more important reason why we chose to do it. And System Shock was not the first game to do this, but it really pushed this approach, what we call breadcrumbing the story, pretty far forward. So as you're exploring, in System Shock, same with System Shock 2, it took the same approach. You as a player feel like you're piecing the story together. You find clues, these audio logs of the dead people before you, who just drop, essentially hints and pieces of information. And in your head, you're piecing it together as you go forward. And it's sort of a player-authored experience. You feel like you're discovering the story, and you feel smart because you can put A and B together to get to C, without the game just putting that in your face.
And I think it sometimes has like the odd side effect that only some players will find every single audio log or note or those aspects in games, and sometimes it's fascinating how you start to construct the narrative when maybe you don't have all those elements. It can actually enhance or amplify a sense of kind of curiosity than having sort of all of having every little blank filled in for you in terms of what happened before, what's currently
Yeah,
happening.
that's a great point, and I think it kind of mirrors how people think, in real world, right? You don't have all the information typically. You sort of get pieces of information from various people about, let's say that some, murder happened, and you hear rumors about it, or you read a story in the paper. You start piecing together in your mind what you think actually happened based on just a few, usually a lot less information than the full story. That's how people think, and that's how people really think. And so we're trying to create that context. I mean, it's like any good mystery, but the difference here is that, unlike a book or a movie, we're not feeding to you that in a linear way. The player is stumbling across that, and because it's open world and we're not constraining very much where you can explore when, you might find this first, 7th, and 29th piece, while another player might find the 5th, 6th, and 14th piece of information in a row. And it does make it more challenging to tell a story that way. But it's also
I
more
was
fun.
about to say, I mean, you really have to be sort of careful how you're parceling the information so that it's not just, you can only get some of it and it'll make some degree of sense, but that you get it in varying orders and you can still kind of group it together and glean some information out.
That's definitely true, and it actually it's an important element of our narrative design approach. I'm thinking specifically right now of a lot of the work that we did on Faith, where uh, there was a lot of thought given to the various means by which people would get narrative information. You could overhear conversations in this. We had basically an eavesdropping mechanic. There was in-world lore that you could read. There was map annotations and mission briefing videos and other channels of information. So there was a very specific narrative design that was built around for each element of the narrative, categorizing it in terms of, is this something the player absolutely needs to know in order to be able to proceed forward? Is it something that they need to know if they're to be kind of less confused, or is it just like adding depth and richness? And by doing this kind of categorization and triage of narrative delivery methods, that's one means that we used to sort of manage the kind of narrative complexity that you're talking about.
Now, is that something that you do at the outset? I mean, for a game like Ultima Underworld or for System Shock 2, and obviously this pertains to Underworld Ascendant, what are the things that you have to start with first? Is it the story? Is it the systems? Is it, how, is I get the structure of the world, and that's the way in which the character is going to start to build their own story. I mean, it seems like there's so many options, and each one, almost like the games you make, really is going to sort of change, and start to guide how the development occurs.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the right answer, or not the right answer, the correct answer is that it comes from both directions. Story and narrative are really important. And the emergent gameplay, the moment-to-moment experiences and the discovery is really important. And so we're trying to weave those two things together. If one or the other is heavily, sacrificed, you just don't get a good experience. So the trick is that you can't develop those simultaneously. You can't have your story all written out like you would a novelist might. And you don't know all your gameplay. You have your best guesses about how the gameplay is going to work from moment to moment. And so you're sort of constantly iterating back and forth, adjusting the story, adjusting the gameplay to see how they play off each other. And it's challenging. One of the ways we've been able to do that, and we'll do that with Underworld Ascendant, is that the story is not a monolithic, heavily scripted by any means. It's the other way around. If you think of the original Underworlds, Ultima Underworld, the story was actually very light. You started you were thrown in the Stygian abyss, locked in there at the beginning, and basically you had to find 7 artifacts. It wasn't much more than that. But the meaning of the story was much richer than that, and we were able to get a lot of story out of the fact that you mechanically were basically just finding out some artifacts, which you did not have to find in any particular order. And when you got all the artifacts, it drew you to the end game. So mechanically, it's not hard. It's hard to combine the moment-to-moment gameplay and have a compelling narrative at the same time.
And then I would have to assume that through the course of development, so you have sort of the mechanics and you have the story, and they're both being developed out, I guess, simultaneously. How do you try to keep those from not constantly coming into conflict with one another, or that there suddenly is contest? Will story win out over what the mechanics are going to be, or vice versa?
Creative conflict is a good thing. We like
That's
creative
true.
conflict. That mashup and that tension is what gets great stuff done. So you just don't shy. It's going to happen, and you're going to have stuff that breaks and doesn't feel good. But it's through that process of iteration and things don't work. I think people who aren't don't have experience building these kinds of these games, sometimes don't understand that when you go into a project, there's a lot of unknowns, um, and there's a process of discovery for the team about what the game they're going to make. And if you think you know what you're going to build, you're just fooling yourself, even if you've done this for 20 years. In fact, that's really a disadvantage. You have to go in kind of with some degree of naivete and some degree of, we don't know what this is going to come out with, because that'll allow you to really open up and creatively find discover the places that work best. There's certain things we certainly know that work, and certain tropes and certain mechanics that are a bag of tricks. But any particular game, there are significant pieces that come through this kind of collision process of intentions that work themselves out, and it's almost like it writes itself in some sense. The team is challenged and says that's not working, and the solution almost emerges by itself. Oh, if we kill everybody off and we have audio logs, it solves all those problems.
I think, and this definitely speaks to some of the discussion we had earlier about the benefits of you guys working on a project like this from an independent perspective. Just hearing that really is kind of an essential creative process. The creative person to me thinks, oh, that's awesome. But I can imagine that for people on the business side of things, that sounds terrifying. That you'd be like, yeah, we don't really know what we're going to do. We're going to keep on fighting until we figure something out. I think it definitely speaks to what is so important and essential about sort of games being made out of an independent financing model.
So this is Chris Siegel. I'm the producer on the project. And basically what Paul just described is agile development, which is used all over the industry. But oddly enough, we don't build our games creatively like that. So, nothing that we're doing is new. We apply these kind of theories in our life all the time. We're just not applying them to the games that we're making.
Why do you think that is? I mean, I have a couple of ideas in my head, but I'd love to hear it from you, Chris.
I think one of the biggest reasons is that when you come to a publisher and there's $50 million on the table, and you tell them that there's path B and path C, and we don't really know what the player is going to do, that freaks them out. Because they want to know that every dollar spent is going to be seen by the gamer at the end. And that stifles that kind of gameplay.
What's interesting is that's definitely indicative of the more Japanese style of a role-playing game. Sort of your Final Fantasy Stars. For the most part, you're going to see just about everything. Probably outside of sort of deep collection elements of the game. And I had always read that somewhat as that was just a creative desire to make sure that I worked on this, that people see it. But I can also see from a business perspective that you want as much bang for every buck that has gone into the project.
I think the other dimension is that if you're a publisher and you're putting $50 million in a project, if you guess wrong, the product's not commercially successful to justify spending $50 million to make it. The risks get very high, and executives lose their jobs because of that. And so, with the high stakes, tends to drive people to be more cautious. Tends to drive people to say, let's do something we know that's going to work. This game was a hit last year. We know it worked last year, so won't it work again this year if we, tweak it a little bit? I'm oversimplifying, but that tends to be the mentality you draw to. So it's both we want to make sure that we're getting our money's worth, but it's also just a risk aversion. The big publishers aren't really tend to be their business isn't thought of as being, taking risks if they don't have to. If they could make every game was a guaranteed success, that would be ideal as a business. With the kind of games we're making, we have to take creative risks. It's just inherent in what we're doing, and part of that is not knowing what the game is going to be. We can't write down on a piece of paper or create a nice little slick video that says, here's exactly the game you're going to get, because we don't know that. And providing that creative freedom and that ability for us to discover is a very important element to achieve